On this Thursday night, confirmation of unmarked graves at the former residential school in Kamloops. Details of what ground-penetrating radar found and the vast area still to be searched.
The truth and reconciliation. What the hell does that mean?
Manitoba's newest Indigenous relations minister gets schooled on residential schools.
They thought they were doing the right thing.
It was the expressed intent of residential schools to kill the Indian in the child.
Holy sh**, there's a tornado right there.
Breaking news, a tornado touches down in Ontario, the catastrophic damage and the danger from fast-moving storm cells. And Canada's former top soldier charged with a criminal offence.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Oh my God, I've never seen anything like this in my life.
This is Barrie, Ontario, where a tornado has torn through the southeast part of that city, causing what officials are calling catastrophic damage. Some homes are badly damaged, vehicles flipped. Police say 8 people have been injured. Power is out and emergency crews are busy trying to restore it and make the streets safe.
I would refer to it as catastrophic, almost warlike. There are homes that have been completely devastated and destroyed. There's rooftops that are missing.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We'll have more on that tornado in just a moment, but we begin in Kamloops, BC. The Tk'emlúps Secwépemc chief calls it heavy truth. The First Nation revealed more detail today on the hundreds of suspected unmarked graves near the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. An expert on ground-penetrating radar says 200 probable burial sites have been found and that further forensic work is needed to confirm them. And she said the total number of remains there is unknown. The Kamloops School was once the largest residential school in Canada. Less than 1 hectare of the 65-hectare site has been searched so far. The chief says they've barely scratched the surface.
You are bearing witness to a very important truth about Indigenous people and Canada. We are not here for retaliation. We are here for truth-telling.
Robin Gill reports on the survivors who told their truths today and what the next steps are in the investigation, and a warning the details are distressing.
The Kamloops Indian Residential School has been closed for years, but it still evokes awful memories for those who attended.
The residential schools was built to beat our language, culture, and traditions out of us.
Evelyn Camille spent 10 years there to cook and clean for whom she calls the black robes, the priests and nuns. She left with a grade 4 education.
That's what residential schools taught me, to be ashamed of my identity.
One by one, the survivors share their stories.
I was taken from a loving home that only knew humor, laughter, love, and honor. Put into a cold, stark environment.
It wasn't by family choice, it was the government choice.
They got out, but others didn't. There were stories of students being woken up to dig graves for their schoolmates in the orchard. Back in the late 1990s, a team of archaeologists excavated a child's tooth. In the 2000s, a tourist found a rib. Then in May of this year, experts used ground-penetrating radar to search parts of the grounds.
We could never say definitively that they are human remains until you excavate, which is why we need to hold back a little bit and say that they are probable burials.
This new evidence shows 215 small, shallow plots consistent with traditional Christian burials. But who were these children? The chief of Tk'emlúps First Nation is demanding the federal government and Oblates of Mary Immaculate Catholic Missionary Group release the attendance records of the students.
They were children robbed of their families and their childhood. We need to now give them the dignity that they never had.
There's no guarantee of accurate records. Children came to the school from across British Columbia, Alberta, Yukon, and the United States.
These are not discoveries. These are recoveries.
In some of her first remarks as National Chief, Roseanne Archibald says the Assembly of First Nations wants the International Criminal Court to investigate what happened here as a genocide.
This is a crime against humanity. This is a crime against little children.
Evelyn Camille has tried to visit this site, now closed off, but she is determined to protect this resting place.
Those remains should be left undisturbed.
A powerful voice of determination, despite all the damage done to her and so many others. The radar only looked at about 2 acres out of 170, and it has already identified 200 other targets that could potentially contain remains. And the new chief of the Assembly of First Nations says she's in talks with the Prime Minister to get funding to begin the excavation, despite elders wanting it to remain untouched. Donna.
So much more work to do. Robin Gill in Kamloops, thanks. There is some support for survivors. A 24-hour crisis line is available for anyone experiencing pain or distress as a result of their or their family's residential school experience. The number is toll-free. You can speak in confidence. It's 1-866-925-4419. Manitoba has a new Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations, and just minutes after he was sworn in, he said this.
The residential school system was designed to take Indigenous children and give them the skills and abilities they would need to fit into society as it moved forward.
That was immediately challenged by Manitoba opposition leader Wab Kinew.
I cannot accept you saying what you just said about residential schools. It was the expressed intent of residential schools to kill the Indian in the child. It is not cultural relativism, it is not revisionist history for us to say that that was wrong. Any right-minded person at the time should have known that it was wrong. Many did know and speak up against it.
There is more to the story. Brittany Greenslade is following it in Winnipeg tonight.
The statements were shocking.
I believe they really did think that they were doing the right thing.
In his first remarks as Manitoba's Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations, Lagimodiere re-inflamed the controversy and hurt that led to his appointment in the first place.
Listen to the stories of the survivors.
Yes.
And I cannot accept you saying what you just said about residential schools.
Lagimodiere, who is Métis, was appointed to the job after his predecessor Eileen Clark resigned. She quit after Premier Brian Pallister responded to the Canada Day toppling of statues in front of Manitoba's legislature by saying colonial settlers did not come to Canada to destroy things, but to build up communities.
I paid tribute to Canadians. I paid tribute to pre-Canada builders. I spoke about people who came here with hope to build families and communities. I spoke with sincerity. I spoke genuinely.
In a statement, Clark says, I have spoken up on several issues, but I feel my voice and other voices were not heard in Cabinet. Change is necessary. Inappropriate words and actions can be very damaging.
You can't be out here defending residential schools if you want to work with Indigenous communities. Killing the Indian in the child was wrong. We all know that that was wrong. So you have to move past that.
Lagimodiere has now tweeted an apology, saying he misspoke, acknowledging residential schools were designed to assimilate Indigenous children, which was wrong then and wrong now. Brittany Greenslade, Global News, Winnipeg.
A northern Manitoba community remains in a state of emergency because of numerous deaths and incidents of self-harm. 9 young people from the Tataskweyak Cree Nation have taken their own lives in the last 9 months. The intergenerational trauma that so many Indigenous people endure is still going on. In some places, it's getting worse. David Akin is following this story for us from Ottawa. David?
Well, Donna, the first thing Tataskweyak Chief Doreen Spence and members of her council did today was to meet with local RCMP to find ways to step up campaigns to prevent illegal drugs and alcohol from being sold to underage members of the community. Drug and alcohol abuse by young people, by teenagers, That was a big problem and was the common denominator in all of the suicides. But the aggravating factor has been the discoveries of unmarked graves at former Indian residential schools.
I think it triggers a lot of anger, a lot of trauma, because they're just finding out. This generation is just finding out what happened to their grandparents.
Seti is the Grand Chief of the Regional Council of Northern Manitoba First Nations, including Tataskweyak, and he was in the community last week.
I just know that they will navigate through this. It's not going to be easy, but they will, and I have hope and faith that they will navigate their people through this dark time.
But the community will need help. There are only 2 mental health therapists in the community of 2,600, and they work only Monday to Friday. The federal government is mobilizing 2 more youth workers, and the Canadian Red Cross is providing funding for more training in the community. But advocates say long-term supports need to be in place, not just in Tataskweyak, but in other remote First Nations.
We have to be very proactive. We have to think ahead and try to reach out to the young people, because it's a very critical time.
Governments in Winnipeg and Ottawa appear willing to respond.
We'll continue to do everything we can in our power to address these issues.
The layers of grief and intergenerational trauma experienced by Indigenous peoples are of particular concern, and that's why we are continuing to work directly on investments for mental health in Indigenous communities.
And the crisis in Tataskweyak was on the agenda tonight when Prime Minister Trudeau and the premiers held their regular teleconference meeting as the country's first ministers seek ways to better support the mental health challenges of the country's First Nations. Donna?
David Akin in Ottawa, thanks. There is some support available. The Canada Suicide Prevention Service line is available in Canada 24 hours a day. The number is toll-free. You can speak in confidence. It's 1-833-456-4566. A big development in the allegations against Canada's former top soldier, Jonathan Vance. He's been charged with obstruction of justice, a criminal charge. He's been under military investigation since Global News broke stories about allegations of sexual misconduct against him, allegations he denies. Mercedes Stephenson broke those stories and joins me now. Mercedes, tell us about this obstruction charge.
Donna, a stunning legal maneuver to see Canada's former defence chief criminally charged. In court documents obtained by Global News, military police allege the former chief of the defence staff told Major Kelly Brennan to lie about their relationship to the police. Lead investigator Sergeant Peter Charlesworth wrote that Vance, between the 1st and 3rd of February 2021, did willfully attempt to obstruct the course of justice in a judicial proceeding by repeatedly contacting Mrs. Kelly Brennan by phone and attempting to persuade her to make false statements about their past relationship to the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, contrary to Section 1392 of the Criminal Code. February 1st, Donna, is the day that Global News first called Vance and asked him about his relationship with Brennan. He denied anything inappropriate at the time. Major Kelly Brennan spoke out to Global News, alleging an inappropriate relationship with General Vance while she was his subordinate in his chain of command, including during his time as Canada's defence chief. She told Global News earlier this year that Vance had attempted to get her to mislead investigators. After Global broke the story, General Vance called you.
Many times.
What did he say to you, Kelly?
Told me to lie.
What did he tell you to lie about?
Having sex. He first started telling me not to say anything about anything.
Vance is scheduled to appear in September in a civilian criminal court. Global News has reached out to Vance for comment, but we have not yet received a response. Vance previously told us at Global News that while he had spoken to Brennan, he had not pressured her to say anything or asked her to say things that weren't true. It is significant that Vance is facing this charge in the civilian justice system. That addresses concerns about whether the military justice system would be able to try him and is a direct response to recommendations recently made in a scathing report by former Supreme Court Justice Maurice Fish. Obstructing justice is an extremely serious charge. Vance could face up to 10 years in jail if he is convicted. Donna?
Okay, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thanks. After the break, we'll take you back to Barrie, Ontario, where that tornado touched down. The destruction coming up. We want to take you back to Barrie, Ontario now, where that tornado touched down. The mayor says no deaths have been reported, but people have been injured. A command center has been set up for those forced from their homes. Global's Erica Vella is in Barrie. Erica, set the scene for us where you are.
Well, Donna, right now there is the command center just behind my cameraman, and the area is just blocked off with emergency personnel. Barrie police have told me that they've asked everybody to stay away from this area, and they've really said that this area is in lockdown. Now, behind me is the area that was hardest hit by this tornado. I'm just going to step out for a sec to show you some of the damage. This is about as close as we can get, but we have been hearing that the damage is catastrophic. Now, it was just after 2:30 when we started seeing that extreme weather. Some of it was captured on social media. There were dark clouds, heavy rain started happening, and it appears a tornado formed at one point. Now, this all happened in the southeast end of Barrie in Ontario. Police say they started receiving reports of strong, damaging winds. Barrie police began responding to calls for property damage. The majority of the damage happened in this intersection that we are in right now, Maple Drive and Prince William Way. Barrie police say in total 8 people were taken to local hospital, 4 with serious injuries. But the cleanup here is going to take days, if not weeks and months. People who have been impacted have been asked to go to this command center, but we are continuing to monitor this story, and of course we'll have updates on our website, globalnews.ca. I'm going to send it back to you, Donna.
Okay, Erica Vella in Barrie, Ontario tonight. Thanks. Ahead, what's behind the decision to rename Toronto's Dundas Street? Toronto City Council has voted to rename Dundas Street, a major artery running through that city. It was named after Scottish politician Henry Dundas. His name will be removed from other public spaces too. It's one more example of cities and sports teams changing who they choose to honor and put on pedestals. Jeff Semple explains.
It's Canada's most famous intersection. Yonge and Dundas is Toronto's Times Square, synonymous with the city and its landmarks. But not anymore.
You can never go wrong doing the right thing.
Toronto is renaming the street, square, subway, and all other buildings bearing the word Dundas, named after Henry Dundas, an 18th century Scottish politician who rejected a proposal to end the British Empire's slave trade.
On favor, carry.
Among those in favor of the $6 million name change, Toronto's only black city councillor.
The history will remember not so much what it cost us to change the name, but it will remember us whether or not we actually take the right action. Our reputation is on the line.
Dundas joins a growing list of historical figures to be toppled. Just steps away from Yonge Dundas Square, this statue of Egerton Ryerson was torn down last month. Ryerson University's namesake was an architect of Canada's residential school system.
It's not about erasing history. It's just about who it is that we're uplifting within our communities.
But Dundas's descendants say his punishment doesn't fit the crime. He supported the abolishment of slavery, but promoted a gradualist approach.
This has been like a trial where they only heard one side of the evidence.
The Dundas debate is renewing questions over which names and monuments warrant removal amid a national reckoning with racism.
It cannot be just let's change the name, let's remove the monument. Let's look at the fundamental way in which we have been representing these people and how we're going to go forward.
The city will now launch a public consultation with Black and Indigenous community leaders to come up with a new name. That process expected to wrap up by around this time next year. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Next, a residential school survivor finally feels able to tell her story. Listening is the only way to understand the intergenerational legacy of residential schools in this country. To date, 3 women who were taken from their families and forced to go to the Kamloops Residential School told their stories. One of them is Evelyn Camille. Until the unmarked graves were discovered on the school site, she hadn't even told her own children what she endured. We leave you tonight with part of what she said. Thanks for watching.
My children came. Why didn't you tell us? I couldn't share my sorrows with them. Our community was one, to look after each other. But these residential schools took that away from us. Our language, our way of life, broken up families still happen today with the Child and Family Services. We have to end that system and be responsible for our own children in our communities. Swearing up and down, when I'm going to come up here, I want the truth to be out and I'm going to be strong. But to think of what happened to many children, the truth and reconciliation. I often wondered, what the hell does that mean? Do they want to hear the truth, really? We have tried to tell them the truth. And who are they? Who is going to listen? The residential schools were specifically built to take the Indian out of us, to take away our language, culture, and traditions, and to make us some astute. But it did not work.